So you're thinking about how to complete the papers, and this video is meant to give you some advice, especially where it regards dealing with assumptions. Now, not all papers will talk about assumptions in their paper, but we ought to take a close look at this because it will impact some students' papers, and it'll allow us to have a larger discussion about assumptions within this unit. Our papers are focused on picking something that you're close to, that you really do understand and can study. Not something distant or remote, or that you have to put a lot of time into researching. We'll do research soon enough, but for this assignment, our research is partly done. Analysis is the key goal for this assignment. You're to talk about the evolving understanding that you had or have about this subject, and to use the language of facts, inferences, and assumptions to help us understand. Now, what's that language of facts, inferences, and assumptions? It's really what we've been working on, trying to understand and parse out what each of these parts mean, what each of these concepts have to do with analysis and our experience on our papers. Okay. Just by way of review, we've got some definitions that we can use. Fact is there, a deed or thing done. Inference, which we've talked about, to bring or to carry. And now we talk about assumption, to take up. What is that about? Like the other terms, to take up is part of the etymology or word history of that word. Assumption comes from an older concept meaning to take up. I like that etymology. I think it really does help us understand something because we take it up, and it's as if we can't put it down again, or we only put it down when we actually consciously set it down. There's a lot that can be done with that concept, and that's why I bring up the etymology now to start us thinking about it. Start with assumptions now. And focusing on this word assumptions, we have to keep in mind that not all of them are bad. In fact, some of them are quite useful, and we work under assumptions all the time. But this is very difficult for people to understand or fathom because they think that their way is the way that the world works and the way that everybody works, right? I think it's really difficult for people to imagine that they are working under assumptions because they've taken it up long ago and they haven't put it down yet. They haven't even realized that they have taken it up because it's been so long ago. So we'll start with real cases. Think about this real statement from a real individual. He says, I am nothing. You understand that? Nothing. I earn $250,000 a year, but it's nothing, and I'm nobody. My expenses range from maintaining an apartment on Park Avenue for $20,400 a year to $30,000 a year for private schools for my children. My total expenses come to over $300,000 a year, leaving nothing left over for dinner parties, paintings, furniture, a mistress, psychiatrists, or even a week in Europe. We do the calculations here. He's got the income, he's got the expenses, and look, he really does have nothing because he's in debt. But of course, he's paying for private school, for really high rent, and more, including mistresses. Oftentimes my students will notice that. This comes from a writer for The Atlantic who wrote a book on different classes in America. But go down to the bottom. It says, what would someone have to believe, especially with the word nothing, in order to think this way? And you'll find it showing up in the language, which is why we focus on it. I am nothing. You understand that? Nothing. This fellow thinks he's nothing. Though that has to fall under a particular definition of nothing, which has to include a certain minimum expectation of income. You might even compare yourself to John Boldow in a passage that we read about his walking around a supermarket with friends. He says in that passage, if you've read it, I've never seen so much to eat in my life. Now remember, John Boldow is one of the lost boys of Sudan. He says that meat is not meat unless it comes from a cow. I thought clams, lobsters, shrimp. Do people eat such things? You don't eat in front of other people, not even to peel an orange. Mealtime is separate, and small sweet foods are inappropriate for grown men who should eat beef and milk. John Boldow says, I had my biggest shock when we passed the aisle beneath a sign that said dog food and cat food. Now, this presumes that you've read that reading, so make sure that you do take a look at it, or that we've had a discussion of that in class. And the point really being here is he walks into the supermarket and sees so much. So much is different for him as he enters into the supermarket and sees what's available. It's certainly different from our assumptions, because we know when a supermarket is stocked with food and one that we expect, versus one that's really paltry or not offering anything. And if you look at what he's talking about in terms of what constitutes food, or even dog food, cat food, you have to ask yourself the same question. What would someone have to believe in order to think this way? And how about what you have to believe in order to think like you do? The point here being, look at the big separation. If we were to take these examples. We got John Boldow. We've got the millionaire here who's worth nothing, he says. It may be the case that we might appear to John Boldow the way that a wealthy person may see us. It may be, in fact, quite a difference to notice how someone with extreme wealth or used to extreme wealth views us, and how that might actually be compared to someone who's entered into a culture of affluence where people have a lot of stuff, such as when John Boldow comes into an American supermarket. So what do we say and keep saying? Assumptions are not all bad. You might have heard the expression by now, and I usually have it recited back to me in class. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, because that spells assume. It's not funny really for me anymore because I've heard it so frequently, and I don't really think it is very meaningful. It's certainly not very accurate because we're always making assumptions. Some are good, some are bad, some are warranted, some are unwarranted. We use the language of assumptions to actually describe whether the assumption we're working under is good. It seems to me that this kind of assumption reflects that the idea that assumptions are for other people. So the very expression itself suggests that assumptions are not what we do, but what other people do because they're wrong. And really what this says is that the only kinds of assumptions are wrong assumptions and ones that other people make. It may also say my assumptions are not the assumptions at all, but facts. So it says something about our own assumptions as well, that we see them as universal, held by everyone, and that other people are the ones who make the wrong assumptions. Well, I don't know if that's accurate, actually. I think that has a mistake in it, because we take a look at the previous examples, and the point of an example like this with John Boldow, and a point of an example like this wealthy man, is to show us that really these are very different kinds of assumptions, and that to another perspective or point of view, our assumptions may not be shared at all. Here's an expression from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which seems really appropriate. He says, we see largely what we're prepared to see. And if we had to zero in on one word from this phrase, we might really focus in on that business of being prepared to see something. Are we prepared to see something a certain way? Are we prepared to see a supermarket as the product of American privilege and what products we have available to us that are not universally offered in the world? Are we prepared to see a millionaire as someone who, as one student put it to me, is a big-time crybaby because he has a lot of money already, but has taken for granted all that money because he has to spend it on such expenses? What are we prepared to see? What is it that we are preparing ourselves to see? A more modern version of this statement could be found in the expression, if all we have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You think of that little child who picks up the hammer, and then suddenly everything becomes the object of that hammer, because that's the way the student is playing. Well, the adult form of that is in part that we have a set of tools in our toolbox. If it looks like a hammer, and we use it like a hammer, we might find nails anywhere we look. What are you prepared to see? You're asked to look at a problem and understand its complexity. What are you prepared to see in that problem? The kinds of conclusions that are commonly drawn, or uncommon inferences, or chains of inferences that we can study and take a look at, and assumptions that we can understand. What are we prepared to see? There's a lot in that word. All right, almost done. Back to your papers. Because all of this abstract discussion about assumptions is very valuable, yet we want to put it in the context of something specific, and we always want to improve our grade because that's the assumption that most of my students are working under. I get it. If you're looking for a thesis, you might look, in fact, to this business of assumptions, and a thesis in particular might develop from what you learned about the situation, which can't be superficial. You want to avoid statements like, I don't know, I just think he's guilty. Or things that don't investigate or analyze why something is the way it is. We also want to resist the urge to repeat the obvious and inaccurate statements like don't assume, or don't assume because when you do you make an ass out of you and me. It seems to me that that's no longer true. We can't really believe that anymore because we know you're taking up assumptions all the time. You assume that this video would work. You assume that your computer would work. You assume that you should show up for class, otherwise there'll be a penalty. There are lots of assumptions that we work under. So to say that we ought not to assume because we make an ass out of ourselves, I think is inaccurate. When people say such things, they're really talking about avoiding errors or recovering from them. And that can be a subject for a paper. What is the error here? What's the clash of assumptions? That's why we talk about this business of discovering something from our mistakes and how that can be valuable for us. Because that's when we can avoid the errors and recover from them. Just as an aside, I just got a notice from Google, which is what that noise is in the background. Kind of rather annoying noise. And they're telling me all the unusual activity on my account. People signing in from Mora, Minnesota. I think the last time I was in Mora, Minnesota, though it's a lovely place, was perhaps 25 years ago. So I'm under the assumption that my password, my security on my account is safe, and I only discover that assumption is incorrect when I have something happen on it. I have to go investigate this further. Don't we all work under assumptions of how the world works or really can work? And then we're shocked to rights when we discover that that assumption may not be universal, may not be timely anymore or warranted anymore, and that we have to change it. If you're looking for possibilities for your assignment, look back to the actual handout of the assignment, the suggestions we've been making in class, and the example papers that we've talked about, because they're meant to help you. Just tried to focus in on a few ways to think about assumptions to dispel the notion that we're not working on assumptions when we think we're right.